In this Supreme Court case, we learned whether the police officers need to have a search warrant before flying over someone's property. And more importantly, we'll learn about the plain view doctrine as it relates to the search warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment. Here are the facts in the 1986 Supreme Court case, California versus Ciraolo.
The facts in this case, Your Honors, are that police received an anonymous complaint that marijuana could be seen growing in a yard at a home in the city of Santa Clara. An officer went by the house on foot, and from the street he saw a rear fence which had bamboo stakes attached to the top of it, elevating the fence up to 10 feet. The officers undertook air observation from an airplane at an altitude of not less than 1,000 feet of ground level and navigated through air traffic in a flight line with the San Jose, California airport. Without visual or optical aids, the officers observed in the backyard a 15 by 25-foot marijuana garden, which was composed, according to the officer's affidavit, of plants that he described as, quote, full and approximately 8 to 10 feet tall. The officers from the aircraft took a photograph. They later obtained a search warrant, and they seized a total of 73 cultivated marijuana plants.
The Supreme Court begins its analysis of this case by repeating the rule that was established in Katz versus United States, a Supreme Court case. I will link this case above so you can watch my video on that case. There we learned that in order for something to be considered a search, an individual needs to have a reasonable expectation of privacy in whatever is being searched or seized by the police. The Supreme Court then quotes Katz again and tells us that whatever the person exposes to the public, even if it's in their own home, will not receive protection under the Fourth Amendment, meaning that the officers are allowed to fly over your property and look for evidence of a crime without getting a search warrant. Moreover, we're talking about 1980s, but maybe even today it's even more prevalent. The Supreme Court tells us that commercial flights, private planes are now routine, and we see planes flying over properties all the time. And just because an officer is doing it doesn't mean that an individual should get any extra protection. If the officer is looking at items from a public vantage point, for example from a plane or from a public street, then he doesn't need to get a warrant before looking into that property. This case introduces us to an important exception to the search warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment, which is called the plain view doctrine. If the officer is standing from a vantage point where any public citizen could stand and see evidence of the crime, he doesn't need to get a search warrant before doing so. Well, this introduces us, of course, to a slew of new cases since 1986. And the idea that when the officer pulls over a vehicle, if he's looking through the window and he can clearly see evidence of a crime, for example, narcotics, he doesn't need to get a search warrant because a plain view doctrine would apply. He can see it just like anyone else. The cases that followed expanded on this doctrine, and we were later introduced by the Supreme Court to the idea of the open field doctrine, where the officers, even without a warrant, are permitted to come on somebody's property and search it. Now, the officers are never allowed to walk into the curtilage of somebody's property. And to understand better the difference between an open field and a curtilage, I have an old video that I've posted before. I will link it above and you'll be able to watch it. If you enjoyed this video, please click like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button so next time I post, you'll be first to know.